I'm Christine, and this is a bi-weekly conversation that I have with Henry on Substack. And so, Henry, why don't you, how are you doing today?
I'm good. And just so people know, you know this is a bi-weekly conversation because I just had a technical glitch and I just threw it to threw it to Christina Star and she caught it and went right with it.
Yeah,
Sorry
and then
about
I'm
that,
throwing it
Christine.
back
But
to you. So,
okay. Actually, the truth is I am exhausted working on this project that we were talking about right before we started. But we can get into that a little bit. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. Life keeps rolling on, and I've got my own projects, and I'm just going to do a little plug for God and Drag because I have a new cover coming out this week. So one of the Kindle's up, the paperback should be up soon. Hopefully, I'll get the reviews merged, but it looks much more like a modern day literary novel instead of the novel that I'd done 15 or 11 years ago in 2015, which I love the cover, but it was just outdated. So I've got that. It's called God and Drag.
Okay.
It's on Amazon. Not the project I was going to be talking about because we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I watched the video clip that you created that is making you so tired because you're now on clip number 2. And it was extraordinary, I thought. And I was like, wow. So tell us a little bit about that because it is part of your it's like a video creation of your book, Colosseum, which had a full cast audio version, which makes spectacular videos. So I'm wanting to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I watched a video which some viewers may be familiar with. It's part of the Chloe versus History series. And one of the things that I want to emphasize if you're starting to see these how to create a movie using AI in 5 easy steps kind of videos on YouTube. Those videos are commercials. They're just
Mhm.
commercials. I mean, because they make it seem as if it's not so much like it's difficult in terms of complex, but it's very, very labor intensive because you have to create this one video that I saw where a guy is talking about this. And again, it's still really a commercial, but he did have the grace to actually admit that to create I believe it was a 3-minute clip, action clip, he had over 500 segments, over 500 clips that had to go together to
Mhm.
basically make a guy run into the desert, climb up a skeleton, and then fight this other guy for 3 minutes,
Wow.
500 segments. And that's what's so time intensive is that to create these visual effects, you have to create individual clips, and each clip has a bunch of different components to it. So what the technology has done is it's made it possible for a person who knows absolutely nothing about cinematography and
Mhm.
is working alone, like literally by yourself, to make a movie.
Mhm.
Now, I had the advantage because the technology has advanced to the point where it can do voiceover. But the thing about these AI tools is that essentially what you're doing is you're giving it information. So if it's a visual clip that you wanted, if it's a visual that you wanted to produce, you can use a visual reference. Like you can take a photograph of yourself and upload it into the dashboard and then prompt it to do things with you. Like,
Mhm.
put me on the Riviera or put me in space or whatever. And when you hit, start, it's like pulling the lever on a slot machine, because you have absolutely no idea what's going to come out.
Right.
None,
Right. Yeah, like the early
and
Dolly.
each
Yeah.
exactly. And like each thing that you do, be it an image, an audio clip, a video clip, each thing you do, it costs you credits. That's the way the companies that are selling these things, that's the way they make money from credits.
Mhm.
And so an image might cost you 20 credits, whereas an audio clip might cost you 100 credits, and then a video clip will cost you about 400 credits. And it all depends on the resolution, on the quality of whatever it is you ask the AI to produce for you. And it also
Mhm.
depends on which AI you're using. So that's the other thing to understand for like just people who are not in this industry is that these tools that you're hearing about. So you hear about Sea Dance. That's the big one that's really
Mhm.
made a big leap in terms of, you give it a couple of images and what it'll do is it'll actually have the things in that image do things, look like they're doing things from one moment to the other. That's what C dance, and C dance is really good at it. And so, but C dance is kind of like a clothing company, Polo. You know,
Mhm,
Polo is the brand, but it actually you can buy Polo clothes in multiple places. Well, that's the same thing with C dance. You can actually access C dance through OpenArt, Hexfield, Runway, through C dance directly, and that's true of all of these AI tools. So there's one that Google has called Nano Banana. That's one. I mean, people may know of and actually have negative feelings for Grok, which is, the one associated with Elon Musk. And people are using it to do terrible things. That is definitely true. But you can access all these different AI tools through multiple places that kind of operate almost like stores, except you don't
mhm,
go in there once and buy one thing. What you're doing is you're paying a monthly or a yearly fee to access
mhm.
a collection of AI tools. That's what you're doing. So
Right.
your money's going directly to whatever platform that you're paying to gain access to all these tools. So it's a lot of work. I mean, but I realized watching Chloe versus History that I had the benefit of having made the decision when I decided to turn my novel Coliseum into an audiobook that I wanted it to be a full cast audiobook.
Mhm.
That's just something that I really felt strongly about, which is the most expensive way to do it, actually.
Right, and real
And so
people.
I
This is
worked with a
not, I want
great
to
cast.
reiterate this, real voice actors in Colosseum. This is
Yes,
not
yes, yes.
the AI portion of this comes with the videos that you're making, but you wrote the novel. You had a full audiobook cast to the audiobook. So you're taking it from there to create the video aspect. But I just want to reiterate because a lot of people get really still, and I don't, hopefully for a while, kind of irritated when everything is AI. They want something human
Yeah,
in
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
And so the fact that you wrote the book and you are a writer and you wrote the book and you had the real people do the full audio version of the book, I think is really important. And then the video truly it's amazing. I mean, watching it, and that's the first thing I
Thank you.
thought of when I was watching it is if you didn't have a full, a full audio cast doing your audiobook, the video wouldn't have worked out nearly as well because you'd have had the same person doing all the
No.
voices and that wouldn't have sounded good.
Or the AI would have basically chosen from a very narrow range of
Right.
voices.
Yeah.
So if I would have
And then you
asked it,
don't have the
old
people
woman.
behind that. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's not really acting, you know what I mean? So the voice actors were professional actors, and they performed each role, and there are a lot of speaking characters in my novel.
Mhm.
So each actor, there were 11 of them, and they were each cast to one main character that they performed. They're the only one that performed that one main character throughout the recording. But then they had all these other characters, that you might meet once.
Yeah.
It's important for the character to be distinct, but it's also not important for one person for more than one person to know anything about that scene. And so, I mean, and these are all professional voice actors. So they're able to each one of them have I mean, they've all recorded hundreds of audiobooks other than mine.
Mhm.
And, and they've all either been nominated for awards or won awards. And so, most of the books that they do, they are the only voice actor.
Mhm.
Cause like I said, having a cast of voice actors is the most expensive way to do it. So even the traditional publishers, they're not going to go that route if they don't have to.
Yeah, very few
So I just
do.
happen to really believe in it.
Mhm.
I just happen to really believe in it, and that's the reason why I did it that way. But to your point, I'm very fortunate in the sense that I've already got the audio already done, and it's saving me a lot of time in the sense that I don't have to do all the things I'm doing for the still clips and then turning those into motion clips. I would also have to do the same thing for the voice. But and the voicing, the post-production engineer, the sound engineer who pulled everything together, they created a certain pacing. So, as a writer for like God and Drag, there's a certain pacing that you had in terms of, reading the
Mhm.
narration and reading the dialogue. And then I had this team of people work together to create another pacing. And then the sound engineer created the final pacing for the audiobook. And that pacing is what I'm using
Okay.
to create the videos.
Well,
So
it's and I don't
yeah.
know how long it's gonna take you to do the whole book, but it's impressive, and I'm looking forward to all the different clips that you have coming out. Because I really enjoyed the book, so plug for
Well,
the book
actually,
if you read the book.
well, thank you so much. I'm actually trying to get it done before the cage match that's happening in front of the White House.
Really? Oh my gosh, that's ambitious. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I mean, it's people are gonna watch Coliseum, and at
Uh-huh.
around the time that this thing is happening, in DC in front of the White House, and think that, well, this is very on the nose. When actually, I wrote Coliseum 2 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
This is reality meeting fiction. So this, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm kind of hoping to have it done by the end of next month. I mean, I'm adding clips, I'm
Okay.
putting as much as I can, getting them together as well as
Mhm.
I can, and then, I'll release that. But once you get in, you'll have access to, all the clips that are there presently and the ones that come later. So
Mm.
that's the way that'll work.
Okay. Alright, well, very good. I'm looking forward to it.
But you should be kind of tired too, because we have a live stream on Sunday that's related to your
Yeah.
project. And I don't know
Yeah.
if you're like burning the midnight oil the way I have.
No, well, I'm burning the midnight oil in other ways because, we had talked about this project a few months ago, and I kind of backburnered it because I thought, yeah, that's something I'd like to get to eventually. But, all of
Hmm.
my projects are kind of like racehorses. They're all sort of competing to be the front runner. But they're all running at the same
Okay.
time. And so, I got Gone and Drag Up, which was a big one, but I've got these other books called Etiquette Express, which are etiquette travel guides for different countries. The first one's Mexico. It's coming out next month. But in order to have something that was an interesting, giveaway to get people interested in buying the books, we had talked about the ethical digital nomad and using, my idea was to use a GPT to help create something to help people who were digital nomads or slow nomads or even, retirees looking for a slow trip or anybody looking for somewhere interesting, but I'll have other GPTs as we go forward to be able to find places to go that are not they're not kind of past their prime. They're not gentrified already because we had started this
Okay.
conversation because we both wanted to go. We both had talked about going overseas and living in different places, and that one of the
Hmm.
problems with that is that a lot of the places that you think about, like you were talking about Portugal, and I had other places
Hmm.
that oftentimes, they're so full of foreigners. And Portugal was a great example because after the financial crisis, Portugal needed capital and they needed people to come in with
Hmm.
simply with just money and spend their money and help the local economy. They had golden passports, they did digital nomad passports. They were very good at, bringing people in, but then, a lot of people came. They took Portugal up on that, and just like anywhere that you've had a system running for a while and costs are geared to the local economy, and then you have a bunch of new people moving in with a lot of money, everything gets pegged to these new people and gets pegged to the level of income that those people are bringing, and local people then lose out or are priced out of their own homes or can't get rentals because all the rentals have been pulled to rent to digital nomads or retirees or that kind of thing. And so it was a common problem that we had talked about. And it got me really thinking about, I created a book on it, which come out eventually, but this GPT to help people find places that are, I call them one, tier two, tier three. So tier one are kind of on the emerging spectrum. They've got enough of a presence, like a infrastructure presence that you can get internet, but maybe it's not, high speed internet all the time. You can certainly find a place to live,
Right.
but it may not be like, the digital nomad furnished apartments that are all lined up for you and you just sort of choose your one online and move in. They may or may not have cyber cafes or laptop type style cafes, but they might have places where you could do that, but there's just not set up for that. Yeah, they may or may not have a lot of co-working spaces that are set up. So they're kind of early places. They tend to be less expensive, which is nice. They also tend to be more, you get to meet more locals and have more of an experience of the country and the place that you're in. And sometimes those are, the like the capital cities of countries that you wouldn't normally think. Like my favorite one to talk about is Rwanda. because you don't think of Rwanda when you think of digital nomad. You think of, the history of Rwanda, which it was not has had, its own genocide problem, but currently is one of the most functional countries in Africa. And Kigali is
Mhm.
an international capital and has the infrastructure for digital nomads. It's not like dirt cheap, but it is certainly a place that you can go and have a very interesting time. And then you've got places that are second tier that have more infrastructure. They may be closer to that tipping point of things being geared toward visitors and international people versus local people, but it's you can still find a local vibe and you can find a more authentic experience, and some of these might be the smaller cities in more established countries. Like Portugal still has some second tier
Okay.
places. Italy certainly has some second tier
Mhm.
places, even though Italy would be considered like a
Mhm.
third tier kind of place to go. A lot of places in South America are second tier. They've got infrastructure that supports digital nomad type of lifestyle, but they haven't broken out yet in terms of being on everybody's list. And then you've got the top tier places that everybody knows about, like, Lisbon and Barcelona and some of the larger places that digital nomads have traveled to for a long time that have kind of become less friendly to foreigners because there's been a lot of money moving in, there's been a lot of displacement of local people. And so, I wanted a GPT that helped to narrow down the research. So, because
Yeah,
basically trying to
I
figure out where to go was
when
a
I
hard
tried it,
thing.
I thought it well, when I tried it, I thought it was really helpful. I was kinda surprised because like you said, I mean, I thought about it,
Mhm.
and what it felt like to me was, especially since I'd already kinda gone through the process over the course of a couple of years, what the GPT does is it allows you to sorta get to a list, narrow down a list a lot faster because
Very quickly, yeah.
you can you can just sorta ask it questions. I mean, because a lot of what I did over the course of a couple of years was just internet research,
Mhm.
and you know how that is. It's like, sometimes you look out and and the results produce a bunch of pages that are helpful, and other times it's like, "No, that's not what I'm looking for," and then you gotta do it all over again. Whereas with this thing, you can just essentially ask a question.
Mhm.
And then it'll start answering the question, and that will kind of initiate this iterative process of figuring out, well, where do I really want to go? Now, I'm
Yeah.
curious. You talked about
Mhm.
the second tier, and this is only because I know we need to get to our topic. This is only because
Okay, yeah.
I've been there.
Uh-huh.
Is Are you familiar with Curitiba, Brazil? Have you ever heard of Curitiba,
Heard of
Brazil?
it, but I've heard of it, but that's the extent of it.
Okay, because I did a 6-week class there related to urban planning and emergency preparedness because they're known for their rapid transit system, which is really fast. I mean, it's extensive and there are a bunch of reasons why they were able to build it that way. But I was just curious because on the one hand, in Curitiba, one thing that struck me was the internet wasn't as reliable as I had hoped, but then again,
Mhm.
what it did is it sort of forced me to live more like the locals, which is to actually go out and meet people. And so, it's like, well, no wonder the phone service and the internet service here is not great because if you want to talk to, Raul, just go down to the cafe. He's probably there,
Yeah. Yeah, but
and
it depends,
so
like,
go ahead.
and it depends too because, for you, like, this GPT starts with the assumption you're kind of a digital nomad, but it doesn't require it. Like you can come to it in a
Hmm.
different way, and it's an interview style to kind of begin to ask what your priorities are. And one of the questions that it asks is like, how important is having high speed, reliable internet? Because for some
Right.
people, if they're working
Yes.
and they're remote working and they have to have that high speed, reliable internet, like that's the primary
To earn
thing
a
that they.
living.
But for other people, like if you're an author or you only need it for a couple hours a day, or you can work on your laptop doing a lot of stuff offline, and then you can do a couple times a week, get online, upload things, do stuff like that. Like if it's not as important to have constant
Hmm.
high speed internet, you've got a much wider variety of places you can go to. But it really, for some people, you actually have to have that. And for a lot of people, maybe you really don't. And you could go to a place like that and have a much more locals experience and, yeah, get offline for a while and meet people. connect with people, and that's what a
Mhm.
lot of what I the thinking behind all the stuff that I'm doing it with travel is less about, where you go and get a great cheap deal because 'cause I'm really not interested in that, but where can you go and have, like, a real connecting experience with people? How do you come into a culture
Mhm.
and be respectful and kind of fit in and navigate through that culture from not from being an outsider, but from being somebody who was in that culture in that time and interacting with people within that. So, I think that's the beauty
Mhm.
of travel, although it's kind of not presented that way as much anymore. It's all about the glitz and eating at the best restaurants and.
Yeah, it is true. It definitely has a lifestyle of the rich and famous sort of feel to it, a lot of these
Yeah,
travel vlogs, definitely.
yeah.
Uh, but one thing could serve as a transition to the topic that I found about immersion is that it really opens your mind. I mean, it forces you because you rely so much on a common language and
Mhm.
common cultural,
Yeah.
mores, social mores. And so when you have immersion in another culture, it forces you to sort of one adapt to that culture. I mean, you can be stubborn all you want, but you're going to have to use the bathroom eventually, and somebody's going to have to tell you where it is.
Right, right,
So you
yeah.
can keep saying, I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to learn. You will learn how to ask, where's the bathroom?
Mhm.
When you're in that situation. And so, but it just really kind of expands your mind in a way that is, I mean, you can really get a lot out of it, or, you could just basically it can be expanded without you necessarily putting a lot of effort into it. And that relates to the topic that you suggested this time. So why don't you talk a little bit about the topic?
All right. Well, I'm going to bounce off that for just a moment before I do that, because I agree with you, and we've had this conversation before that travel is one of those things that's kind of an easy early entry system to changing your own mind about things because you have to experience things in a new
Mhm.
way. And whether it's I lived in Japan for a while, very different culture to live in, and it's sort
Mm.
of mirrored
Mhm.
back to me all the things that were invisible to me about my own culture that I had to be like, "Oh, okay, there are more than one way to think about things. There's more than one way to do things." And even living in Australia, and that was a rural experience in Australia when I was a suburban LA girl, you know, I I learned to think about life differently and to a different set of
Mhm.
values and things, and it was a non-threatening way. And so many times things that challenge our sense of reality feel threatening. And travel is one of those things that
Mm.
you kind of expect things to be different. So you don't have all
Mhm.
of your hackles up when it comes to that. Now we're leading into our topic
Mhm.
today, which was really about thought experiments and how they can break open your sense of reality. Because I'm kind of a masochist when it comes to really challenging my own sense of reality because I find it fun. Honestly. So, there was thought experiments are like taking an idea and imagining that that idea is true and real, and how does it change your perception based on having this other model of reality that you're operating from? And is kind of how I think about thought experiments generally. But this particular thought experiment was one I've been watching for years. There's Elon Musk and different people, with varying levels of credibility have been talking about how we may be, or certainly are not, depending on who you're talking to, living in a simulated reality or a simulated universe. And there's all kinds of ideas about how this might be set up. Totally not interested in any of those ideas. But the thing that got me about that was I was listening to these and I thought, what if I truly stepped into the belief and what if I really believed for 5 minutes, right? Suspending all of what I thought and thought for 5 minutes, what would it be like if somebody flipped a switch and I knew I was living in a simulated universe? And the thing that broke down, like, almost immediately was all of this moral infrastructure, mostly religious based, but a lot of the do's and the don'ts and the things that you're supposed to do, all those invisible rules that held me in place because they were reality, that I needed to fit into this kind of reality. But in a simulated universe, I thought, well, then it's just optional. Like, there's no reality that's holding this in place. This is just like a piece of code or programming that's organizing this particular part of the game. And I sat with that, and I sat with it actually for a lot longer than 5 minutes. I really let it flow through me. I'm a very energetically based person. So as those ideas started flowing through me, like I could feel things shift and change and fall away. And that particular thought experiment, and I have no skin in the game whether we're in a simulated universe or not. I really don't care. Is it going to change my daily reality? No. So I'm still going to have to like make breakfast in the morning, all that stuff. But it's so changed my this very invisible structure of reality that I had been spent years trying to dismantle from kind of an intellectual place, that it just like flipped a switch in my body and was like, yeah, you don't have to believe any of that stuff. Like, none of that stuff has any hold over you unless you want it to. And even now and this was several years ago when this happened, and even now when there's, like, a thorny thing, I'm like, "What if I was in a simulated universe and this was just a piece of code? Is this something that I would want in my, like, running part of my avatar or not?" And like, no," or, well, yeah, maybe, I kinda like that." It's still so it's a useful thing for me, but it was a very powerful thought experiment. So you had talked about the idea of thought experiments and how they impacted you a little bit as well.
Well, actually, what I was really getting at was that what you when you presented this topic to me,
Mhm,
what it reminded me of, and then I looked a little bit into, like, you sent a video, and I watched a video of this guy talking about simulated realities, and basically what you are referring to as the thing that sort of prompted these ideas for you, like made you think, consider this,
mhm,
and you just basically say, "Oh, this is a thought experiment. So let me consider
yeah,
what this thought experiment gets for me." And as I watched the video and thought about this, it reminded me of how I felt when this was actually the summer in between graduating from high school and starting college.
mhm,
And I attended a class, and I went to a Catholic university.
mhm,
And I'm not really sure why they had this available. It was almost like a bridge class for because most of the kids that who also grew up in New Orleans that migrated from high school to this university, most of us went to Catholic schools as well.
okay,
So we weren't necessarily in class with each other because in that sense, New Orleans, it might surprise you, was kind of conservative. My high school
mhm,
was all boys, and the
okay,
girls went to all girls high schools.
mhm,
And so, this was like an opportunity where you can be in a class with mixed gender and all this kind of stuff. But this particular class had us read books like Sid Arthur. What else did we read? No Some Underground.
mhm,
I think we read Meditations, Descartes' Meditations, and stuff like that. And then we would talk about it. So we would read the
mhm,
book and then we talk about it that week.
yeah,
And what I was saying is that what you're describing in terms of you're saying a simul if it if you consider the idea of being in a simulation and you're
mhm,
assuming that like beliefs are like code that you can sort of isolate and then remove that code, so like a
mhm,
belief in, let's say, I'm going to try to pick something. Let's see, a belief that New York pizza is better than Chicago pizza. That's
okay.
when I've encountered
Alright, that's not gonna ruffle too
since
many
I've
feathers, I hope, yep,
you can basically isolate that belief and just remove it,
mhm,
or you could change it. So if you're a New
right,
Yorker, you think that New York pizza is better than Chicago, you can change it where you think that Chicago pizza is better than New York, and boom, ta-da, it's there. And so this class that I took sort of did the same thing for me, but not in terms of the thought experiment of being in a simulated reality. What it did, it just made me realize that there's almost like a world of ideas that goes all the way back through time in both directions. So you
mhm,
have ideas that were developed by different people in different places, usually communities of people, although since writing wasn't a common thing, the community was very narrow in this particular place. So the people who
mhm,
could write,
yeah,
they would write a treatise, and then another group of people who could read would read the treatise, and then somebody in
oh,
that group would write something in
yeah,
response, and they're just developing these ideas. And I hadn't really thought about it that way quite
mhm,
explicitly as the world of ideas,
mhm,
but that's kind of the way that I saw philosophy, which is why I
mhm,
eventually persuaded my parents to let me change my major from microbiology to philosophy.
good job,
And so that's the way it was for me. And kind of to what you're saying, this, like sort of loosening the hold that beliefs have on you because of culture and whoever introduced you to that belief or whatever, or the other people in your life who strongly hold that belief. Sometimes that'll be an impact that will influence whether or not you subscribe to that belief, or that at least you kind of operate with it sort of as a default. And so, like, this idea of loosening that hold to the point where it's like you question those beliefs.
Mhm,
If you were raised to believe that God is basically a somewhat narrow minded guy, essentially,
mhm,
you can question that belief. If you were raised to believe that liberals are all evil, or the other way around, that conservatives are
mhm.
all evil, you can question that belief, or whether the pizza in your community is better than the pizza in some other community, whatever.
Right, but
And so
go ahead.
that's all.
Okay. Well, and to that note, oftentimes like this history of ideas has shaped our current history or shaped our current world. And the thing about beliefs is that, beliefs are kind of an idea that you hold in your body as truth or reality. We mistake an idea about reality for reality all the time because that idea of reality is built into our biology because of, usually from the time that we're, being raised, we're raised with patterns and habits and people and cultures and language and different things that kind of build this inner landscape, which we've talked about before, so that these ideas
Mhm.
that we have about what's true, what's not true, they are, kind of physical programs that we live out, physical patterns that we live out. And to your point with this philosophy and with going to a school where they challenge your sense of reality with different ideas, you have the opportunity then to consider what about this idea versus this idea. And if this idea that I've been raised with or trained with, you know, is challenged by this, like how does that actually shift and change inside you? What does that actually do? So some people it becomes mental, some people, for me, everything's very biology energetically based. So, if I do a thought experiment with an idea, like I feel how it's reorganizing itself in my body. But that's one of those things that, most people don't voluntarily challenge their sense of reality on a regular basis.
No, they don't.
But you are,
That's
whether
true.
it's
No, they
travel,
don't.
which is a great thing, or ideas, which is another wonderful thing, reading things that are outside of your norm, or, reading even science fiction or things that present a different kind of reality and not from a defensive place, but from a, if this was actually a true place, then, what would that mean? How would I be different? What would life be different? And most people don't do that. Most people spend most of their life defending their version of reality. I mean, defending their ideas, which is why I think that, travel or thought experiments or, reading Descartes and doing some of the thought experiments or other ways of thinking are so important because otherwise, you kind of stay trapped in this tunnel vision that you have. And our little teeny tiny narrow snippet of our personal reality in our teeny tiny narrow snippet of life in our teeny tiny narrow snippet of history is very, very limited, and there's a lot more possibility than what we ever entertain, even when we try.
Well, I do want to connect one of the things that you said to one of the other things you've said in the past. In fact, we had a whole conversation about it. I think it might have been the first Friday or the second Friday that we did this, which is you said that, there's the energy that's for you is like energy that's connected to you physically, like biologically. And then there's the reality outside of you that you're perceiving, but the two things are different. And that reminds me of an idea that you introduced me to, which is the finger is not the moon. So there's the finger, which could be your perception of it, your finger pointing at the moon. But what you're kind of saying is that people sort of assume that their finger is the moon.
Mhm.
So the moon might be very, very different from what they perceive it to be, but they mistake the finger that they're using to point at the moon for the moon itself.
Yes.
One thing that I that what another thing that came to mind as you were talking that occurred to me or reminded me of is, and I was in a writing group with a guy who was a what did he say, evolutionary psychologist or something like that. But we wound up talking about this, and I explained that when I was traveling, I had the realization that in a way what we all do until we come to the realization that this is something that we do is we assume that our normal, what's normal for us, is
Mhm.
normal for everybody else.
Yeah.
So I'm a tall guy. So what's normal for me is to put things high, the things that are
Mhm.
important high, and to put the things that are not important low.
Uh-huh.
I was married to a woman who was much shorter than me, so normal for her was to put things
Right.
low and not put things high. That
Right.
might have been part of the disconnect that we had. And one thing that I discovered in traveling because I kept encountering, especially going from region to region. I'd already had like the experience of going from the South to the Midwest, and that was kind of a culture shock.
I bet. Yeah.
And then, like, going back to the South as a Southerner who has been living in the Midwest was sort of a culture shock as well, because I'd forgotten a bunch of things that are very, very common in Louisiana in particular. Because
Mhm.
the first city that I went to was just on the other side of Lake Pontchartrain from where I grew up. And
Mhm.
so it kind of made me realize that, if you stop assuming that other people have the same normal as you and you
Right.
just pay attention to what they're saying, people are constantly telling you what they think is normal in
Yeah.
one way or another. Some people explicitly. Like some people will literally say, and the Bears are going to win. They're the best team in the world, right? The Bears are the best team in the world. People will literally give you leading questions, but other people sort of they speak in ways where the assumptions are very, very clear. So the only way that what they're saying makes any sense is if you assume, for instance, that liberals are evil or that conservatives are evil. The only thing that what they're actually saying right now makes any sense is if you assume one or the other thing. And so once you kind of train yourself to like not assume that you're normal and you're not walking around and other people are just reflections of you. Once you
Mhm.
get over that, people are constantly telling you what they think is normal. And there's a certain kind of, I don't know, like fluidity that you get with that. And so if you're the kind of person who manipulates other people and you can do that, like you're able to sort of recognize that, oh, okay, this is what's normal for that person. It
Mhm.
makes it much easier if you are a a con man or something like that, a manipulative person to
Yeah.
basically manipulate people because if once you understand they're normal, you know what their parameters are, you know what their motivations are, you know what their fears are. It's all like right there. And the reason why you don't normally see it is because we're so stuck in our own head.
Mhm.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
totally, and I think, you know, I can't remember the name for this when I was in graduate school, what we were talking about. It's not the internal external locus idea, but, there was an idea that some people are much more tied to their sense of reality. So, and I'm just gonna talk about this in general terms, that we, generally speaking, like certainty. Some people like certainty more than other people like certainty. Certainty gives our nervous
Hmm.
system a sense of calmness. Now, certainty is an illusion because nothing is certain except for change, right? So, and a lot of people
Right.
will build up their world, their inner landscape, the world around them, their news things that they look at, the people that they interact with, the places that they go and stuff to reflect to them that level of certainty. And it takes a lot of energy, in my view, because you're always, no matter what's coming at you, you have to find a place for that to land in your certainty, or you need to reorganize your certainty to adopt it if it's something that you think is important, or you need to reject it. So there's a lot of defensiveness around that. It takes up a lot of energy to be in this place of really being tied to a sense of certainty. Now, there are people who have trained themselves. You've done it. I've done it. A lot of people who travel have done it. A lot of bicultural people have done this. Con men can do this, although they do it a little bit differently. Like they understand how it works in other people, but and they're able to manipulate it in other people, and they might even be able to entertain different versions of reality, but within them, generally speaking, there's the con core, right? And there's everything leads to that con core. So, that's still their main game. And so everything else is part of it playing that game. But for people who have been in situations where there is not so much certainty, if you're traveling, and you're in a place that is completely foreign to you, you kind of have to suspend that attachment to certainty or you will be in an anxiety attack the entire time. You have to be able to
Exactly.
hold these alternate viewpoints of reality. And the more you train yourself to be able to hold more and more, levels of reality as like, this is just all these things that are happening all at the same time to all of these different people. And I know what kind of mine is, but I'm not so attached to mine because I can see that it's not the only one. And I can see that it's not the only decent one, and, like, there's things that I've taken from other cultures that I've liked better than the ones that I was raised with, so there are things of value to take from different places, and you can, 1, be more compassionate because you can be with people in their reality, and some people, especially if you're in pain, that's a reality that you just can't break out of in that moment, like, you're in pain if somebody's
Right.
passed away, if you can be with them in that reality. It doesn't have to be your reality, but you can enter into that reality with them and companion them in that reality without it feeling like a violation of you personally. We always talk about this big thing about being authentic. And so for people who are authentic in defending their sense of reality, then it's like I'm my authentic self if I like, scream and yell at you for something that I think you're doing wrong because that's my authentic self. But that's not really a very nice authentic self. But you can be your authentic self by recognizing that, I am a collection of ideas and thoughts and feelings and values, and I can be with somebody who's completely different than me. And, we can either find a meeting place or I can just be present with them and be present with their level of reality without it threatening my sense of self. And that's a place
By the
that
way,
I've,
that
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the term for what I was talking about is confirmation bias. Have you ever heard
Yeah,
that
yeah.
term?
Oh, yeah, yeah, that was part of it. I didn't say it, but that's part of the thing. Like, you're always looking for things that confirm your sense of reality. And the things that seem to
Okay.
be true are those things that confirm what you already believe to be true. Yeah, confirmation bias is huge. And most people, because it feels good, use confirmation bias. But you
Hmm.
can train yourself to kind of walk in reality lightly, to not be over attached to your own sense of reality and recognize that everybody has like their own sense of reality and you don't have to feel threatened by that. And that's like getting past that idea of being threatened by somebody else's viewpoint or opinion or sense of reality, I think is a big skill to develop. And as writers, we develop it because when you present your writing to somebody else, in a writer's group and somebody says, I don't like this, like you have to learn how not to take it personally, right? You have to learn to separate out this is what I think versus, I'm attacking you. And that's a great skill to be able to have that.
Well, the other thing you have to do as a writer, if you want to write like truly diverse characters, you have
Hmm.
to really understand what it's like to be in that person's shoes. And the way that I do it with female characters, for instance, is I'm usually in a writing group with female writers.
Hmm.
And so, fortunately, in fact, just recently, Allison told me, "Oh, your female characters are usually pretty good," and I was just like, "Yeah," but then there are those moments when, I need you to tell me, "No, she would never do that."
Right. Yeah.
No, in that situation, she wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I was thinking though is, and you're kind of alluding to this in the last couple of things that you said, which is part of kind of what we're dealing with, which feels like almost like a mass psychosis, at least in the
Mhm.
US. But it
Yeah.
seems global, to be honest with you. It seems as though there's a global thing. There's a similar thing happening in completely different cultures all around the world,
Yeah.
and it seems to have something to do with the general population's comfort level, with individual comfort levels with difference,
Hmm.
because people are complaining about like, well, they're just different and stuff. And I think you're right that, societies could probably come up with these different tools and methods for getting people to sort of overcome that difference. I mean, there are all kinds of studies that show that people who have, this particular group in their proximity tend to be less likely to have like strident feelings against that particular group.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's not even necessarily a racial or ethnic thing. Sometimes it's a gender thing, like, boys who spend enough time with girls and vice versa tend not to have negative feelings about, boys
Yeah.
or girls,
Yeah.
or at least they're less likely to. They're less likely to. But I also think that there is another problem, though, that we're dealing with, which is, and this is kind of, to be honest, the first thing that like that hit me with the idea of a simulation, and that just reminded me of Descartes' thought experiment as to whether or not he asked the question as to whether he started with nothing. He started from, I think he even used this is where the term tabula rasa comes from, but I'm not exactly sure. But the idea that maybe nothing else really exists, including other people's minds. So I'm going to start from zero,
Right.
emptiness, blank page.
Uh-huh.
And when I first encountered that idea, here I am, I think I might have been 17, black teen, grew up in New Orleans. It just sounded really solipsistic to me. It sounded, there was a kind of arrogance to it. But I
Uh-huh.
do believe, and it turns out that's not really necessarily what he meant. I mean, although that we are talking about like classical males. So, a certain amount of solipsism might have been the norm
Yeah.
back then. But now, even in our environment, with all the diversity and all the communications, to the point where it's like, you can literally see events on the moon, or at least in space, in China,
Mhm.
and Ukraine, and New Jersey, in New Orleans, all at the same time. All you have to do is just go to YouTube.
Yep. Yeah.
And so even in that world, you have people who, for whatever reason, I mean, it's just maybe you can consider this to be a psychosis where they literally are unable to imagine that other people have their own agency, which kind of relates to one of the rants that, during our conversations, I can go into a rant sometimes when I was talking about, is this really your business? To
Uh,
me, it's like people who are like that, people who suffer from solipsism, it's almost like they just can't imagine. Because I was listening to the convocation on Unscripted, and Christine DeMay explained that for some evangelical Christians, when they say religious freedom, they have a very expansive view of what that means. So what they actually mean is that since their views are correct and everybody
right.
else's views are incorrect,
Uh-huh.
religious freedom for them means that everybody else has to basically be brought into conformity with their
Right.
views. So that's
Right.
freedom in their conception of the word freedom. It's
Mhm.
a very solipsistic way of looking at the world. And I think I don't think that's most people. I think most people, going back to what you were saying, really just have like, it's a comfort level issue with difference,
Mhm.
and it might be difference because, some of the people who have the most strident views against immigrants, they live way up in the northern part of the country. They're nowhere near
Yeah.
the Mexican border. It's
Right.
like,
Right. And they don't have very many
why are
immigrants
you in
around them. Yeah.
Montana?
Yeah.
Exactly, not even around them. It's like, they're right next to Canada and they're
Yeah.
fixated on Mexico.
Right.
It's
Right.
crazy, and so in that case, it may actually be instances where it's just different, difference,
Mhm.
no exposure to difference. Whereas in other cases, since we're talking about networks of people, they may
Mhm.
also have a person in their family who, regardless of exposure, they have a very solipsistic sort of attitude when it comes to beliefs. It's like
Right.
I'm not comfortable, and I don't feel like I'm free unless everyone around me has the exact same view that I have.
Right.
So there's
Yeah.
there's also that issue.
Yeah, well, that's that personal fragility, if I don't feel like I have any agency unless everybody is reflecting back to me that we all have the same agency. I think though too, this kind of comes back to another conversation that we had about we were talking about what's the boy, I just flipped through my mind. What rights we have by virtue of being human. And I think so
Mhm.
much of our structures in the world are set up so that, there are groups of people who are more equal than other groups, who have more rights than other groups, who have more opportunity than other
Mhm.
groups. And that, we kind of have that inherited idea that we're all part of that group in one way or another, or we're not part of that group. I mean, there's the identity of being in it or being out of it, but we all have that pattern of, for me to have my rights, other people inherently must not be allowed to have the same rights. And there's a huge jump that requires a big inner shift when you begin to think of everybody, and we can extend this to animals and things like that, but that everybody has an equal right to exist, and that everybody has an equal, right to be who they choose and want to be, and that regardless of religion or skin color or gender or anything, everybody has that same inherent value. And so much of our history is about devaluing groups of people, for profit, for power, for different things. And it's so built up in our systems, and we all have our own conceptions of that built into our biology, that in order to consider that, there's so much that has to be deconstructed in how you view yourself in the world. And that's big work. That's not, that takes more than a single thought experiment. That for a lot of people would trigger an existential crisis. When I was doing hypnotherapy and stuff, like when I was dealing with people that had this very fixed view of the world and fixed view of themselves, and there's all these different puzzle pieces that all have to fit together to keep the picture in place, right? And then they come to me because they don't
Mhm.
like this puzzle piece. And I'm like, well, this puzzle piece is connected to all the other puzzle pieces. So we start messing with this puzzle piece, everything's going to get rearranged. And for some people, that worked, to a certain extent. Some people worked beautifully. Some people it was like, yeah, okay, I can't have that puzzle piece rearranged because I can't have the rest of my puzzle rearranged. And it's that, to me, like that level of infrastructure within us, emotional infrastructure in us that holds that in place, and to start chinking away at that can cause some serious existential crisis problems. And we all have so much stress anyway. Who has time for existential crisis? So you were saying,
Well, I guess we're getting close to the end, but the last thing I was going to say is I agree with you that it is a challenge for for the broader public, individuals in the broader public. I totally agree. But one thing that occurred to me is the kind of the that kind of aspiration of a diverse world where you get to be yourself, your true self, and you're comfortable with everyone else being their true selves, and you'll just work it out. Like you'll work
uh
together to sort of build community, build all kind of other things in institutions, progress as a society, and all that stuff. That is it. That idea has popped up. Going back to the world of ideas, it's popped up in different places. Like
hmm
I don't know if you have heard of this book. I believe her name is Molly Applebaum, but in the title is something like "Here Where I Am Is My Country," and what it is about the Jewish labor boomed in Russia. And when I heard like interviews of her talking about this, basically her grandfather, I mean, that's what inspired her to do it. And the types of things that he believed in, and in this community of people that, that were fighting for the kind of society that I just described, where they get to be Jewish, they
hmm
get to have their society, their culture, and they will work with these other groups of people, to fight the czar, and to fight, the oppressive, owners, landowners and stuff. And so it just reminded me, yeah, like this, well, that this idea did pop up in different places. But the one thing that it seems as though never comes with it, except for maybe, at the moment of the civil rights movement in the United States of America, is that it usually doesn't use all the tools that religions tend to use to
yeah.
make a belief system cohesive. And those tools, because you have some people who are motivated by, I know you don't like this word, but ideals. You have people who are
What's that word?
motivated by ideals. Uh, okay, so yeah, people, like progressives, like a lot of progressive, the way they talk, like right now, there are people who are motivated by ideals. But other people might be motivated by something else. The ideals may not be the main thing to get them to want to belong to this particular movement or group. They might be motivated by, you might have like people who subscribe to this ideals also sort of have a certain aesthetic about them, and that might
Yeah.
motivate some people. You might you know, poo-poo that as like superficial. But the simple fact of the matter is, it's like, churches like Christian Catholic churches are not beautiful for no reason. It's like, it's not like there's no
Yeah.
value in the beauty of, the architecture in Catholic churches and mosques around the world. I went to one of the things I tell people you have to visit is the Baha'i Temple in right outside of Evanston, Illinois. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I mean, that's another dimension to whatever
Mhm.
the community is all about. And I've noticed that like these movements for the ideal of a diverse community where you get to be you and other people get to be, themselves and you're all just working together tends not to also use all those other dimensions that religions use, music, visual aesthetics,
Yeah.
other forms of art like paintings and telling stories, and they tend not to do all that. They tend to just be, this is right. Don't you see why this is right? Why don't you join me in
Well,
this fight to make right, the dominant thing,
yeah, and I think one advantage that the civil rights movement had with this, I mean, they did use religion, they did use music, they did all of these things, but they
Right.
also changed the
Right.
structure.
Right. Right.
And a lot of this division that we have is structurally held in place because by dividing people into little teeny tiny things that you control this little group by this little trigger, this little group with this little trigger, this little group with this little trigger, divide and conquer, right? And so if the system can remain the same because everybody's fighting their own little divisions, then we don't change the system. The civil
Hmm.
rights changed the
Yep.
system. And, parts of it are changing back, but hopefully the system itself is so ingrained in people that that's going to bring us, we talked about before, this boomerang effect forward, that people are just going to hit this critical mass where we're like, jump right ahead and finding even more equal rights for people, hopefully. But what you can't, when you have an idea or an idealism that you can get people fired up, but it doesn't fit into the structure that you're in, or you can't figure out a way to make that structural in people's lives, it sort of becomes like this little island that you live on. Like, I believe this, but nothing in my reality reflects this to be true. And so when you can change the
Yeah,
structure,
yeah,
you can
exactly.
change the.
Yes, I totally agree. In fact, I think that's a great that's a great place to end it.
All right,
So,
very
so
good.
actually, this time, normally I say, we're meeting in 2 weeks, but I hope whoever's joining us today will join us on Sunday. We're
Hmm.
meeting again to talk about ethical relocation, ethical nomadism,
Ethical digital nomadism.
and
Yes.
we're meeting on Sunday, this coming Sunday at 11 o'clock Eastern, New York time.
Yes.
So I hope you join us. It's going to be another live stream. It should be really interesting. Christine is going to basically advise me on
Yeah.
where to go.
All right. Yeah. We'll see how
So
that
so
all
that
works
should be
out.
fun.
All right. Bye, y'all.
All right. Thanks, everybody.